Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. How I paint things never changes. Today we're going to tackle the T-51B Power Armor from Fallout 4. And I really enjoyed this. It's actually a really simple set of techniques as well. There isn't a lot of complex highlighting at all. We're really just going to use a dry brush and a few shades, more or less. Now, if you do... So this one's nice and quick. I'll make sure that all of the paints are listed in the description below as well. Without any further mucking around, let's crawl out through the Fallout. Now this fella is actually a 3D print from a file that's available on Thingiverse. The fella who uploaded this sculpted all of this himself rather than sort of snatching it from the game files. So there are one or two little concessions which make it easier to print as a miniature rather than being a three-dimensional object that's never really meant to be in reality, which can be a bit of a problem if you're taking game files for 3D prints. Just something to bear in mind. Now the first thing that I've done is to hit him with a primer spray of gunmetal from the Army Painter, but anything will work here, like a mid-tone grey or similar, because we are going to hit him now with a little bit of Leadbelcher. Reason being, I want a slightly darker finish than I've got here. And if I need to tidy up, I can use something from the pot a little bit more effectively than having to worry about matching the primer. So I'm just going to go very quickly over the whole miniature. I'm not worried if I'm going to hit areas that are going to be green or what have you later. Just make sure that you are getting it right into any recesses. Now that's nice and quick. Really only takes one coat over a gunmetal primer, but if you're using a grey, you might want to do 2 coats to ensure you've got an even coverage. Now, painting a plain silver armor is the simplest thing in the world, and I love it. So I have here some Nuln Oil and a big old brush. All we're going to do is just apply this fairly generously over the whole miniature. If you get it on his armor, that we're going to paint green later, don't worry about it. Just make sure that any recesses in the the silver stuff, really, make sure you are getting your Nuln Oil into there. Once you've done this, you're going to want to leave it for about 30 minutes to dry. Now at last, we've got a really nice deep gunmetal color. With all that shading, looks brilliant. And your camera will finally focus on the bloody thing. What we're going to do now is move on and dry brush some Necron Compound over the whole miniature. So I've got one of my makeup brushes here because I want a nice soft bristled brush. All I'm going to do is lightly flick along the trailing edges of armor, so you want to be quite gentle with this at first. You'll see straight away how we get highlighting on that knee, whereas not that one. Couple of passes there. Oh my gosh, that's shiny. So go around all of the exposed silver areas. Bearing in mind I'm going to paint the torso and what have you green later. So just concentrating on arms and legs, basically, and with a bit of Necron Compound, get a little bit of highlighting going. Now that's nice and shiny, nice and quick as well, and honestly, if you were in a hurry, you could call them down there. But what I'm going to do is finish in painting the rest of the details. Now we're going to start by painting the frame of this one. Now Power Armor has undergone a lot of revisions and design changes over the years, owing to different artists having a look at it and doing what they want. I am going for the Fallout 4 look with this Power Armor. So, his hands, I'm painting Celestra grey. This is a nice sort of, I would describe it as hospital blue. It's got a slight bluish tint to it. And when we shade this, this is going to look brilliant for that frame color. As well, this fella here, he's got these actuators. You'll see here these plates fit over the top of this part of the frame. So Celestra grey this as well. But remember, you are painting something that is made up, so you should feel free to paint it whatever color you like here. Now that cool clinical blue isn't going to look quite right now, but as always remember, we are going to do more to it. And don't forget, the outside ring of the, where his fusion core sits. Now we are going to need to move on and do a little bit more to the frame. So for this I have Rakarth flesh, and we're going to paint in the the rubberized areas which flex and bend between joints. So these bits here, for example, and I've moved down to a smaller brush for this because this is going to require a little bit more control. Don't forget his elbows. And this is also a good color to paint in the hoses on his helmet, because these are all a fairly similar sort of beigey brown. Now, as a quick note, while you're painting in the areas close to his hips, obviously we want the armor here to stay silver. So I'm going to paint with my brush leaned slightly towards the groin plate, I guess it would be, because since we're going to paint that green later, it doesn't matter if I get a little bit of this Rakarth flesh on there now, versus I want that silver to stay like it is. Now, speaking of parts that we can tidy up when we're painting our armor later, this little section on his midriff, sort of brown area, I'm going to use Steel Legion Drab. And same thing applies. I do not care if I get a little of this onto green areas later. Now, the last of these pre-armor colors, I'm using Mournfang Brown, and there is a little leather strap section around his neck that I want to hit with this. And same thing applies. I'm going to try and paint away from any silver I want to keep. But stuff that's going to be green, I do not care if I hit it. Now, any other leather straps that you find on his armor, you can paint those in at the same time. What I'm going to move on to now is we're going to shade all of those little bits that we've just done for the frame. And I've got here my Agrax Earthshade. So you want to be using a fairly small brush for this, really. But just paint this over all of the areas of the frame that we have just put the base coats on. Now again, if you were in a hurry, you could add a little Agrax Earthshade to some of these silver areas just to grime them up a bit and, put them on the table. He's looking pretty reasonable. But I do want that nice green armor. Now, if you want to stick purely to Citadel products for this, I'd suggest Death Guard Green is going to be your best choice for this. But I do want a slightly more authentic sort of army olive drab. And for this, I'm using Brown Violet from Vallejo. Now this with just a little bit of water mixed in, I'm going to apply this over all of the armor areas I want to be green. So, taking my time when I reach areas that I want to stay silver. And remember that quite a lot of this is painted green. For example, if I flip them round, cables and what have you are all essentially armored. So we're just going to paint in all of that in green. You'll find this covers very well, and yeah. Let's come back in a few minutes and get a look at what that looks like when that's finished. Now, in areas down the side of the miniature, so around cabling and pipes and such like that, you'll find that that covers in one go, whereas you'll want to let it settle and dry and paint flat areas with a second coat, just to make sure that you're not getting any of that silver showing through. But once you've done that, it's time to decide on how you want to shade it. If you want a really grungy dark green, then what I'd suggest is do this stage before shading all of your undersuit stuff, and you can shade it all Agrax Earthshade at the same time. I want a slightly crisper, more green shade, so I'm using here a Thonian Camo shade, and I'm going to apply this in a controlled fashion over all of that green. So spin them around is probably a good spot to see this a little more clearly. I'm just going to start painting this in, and guiding it into any recesses where I need to. And then once I've gone around all of the green, same as all of our other shades, we'll leave that for about half an hour to dry. Now we've got that nice deep shade of green, things are really starting to come together. But it's a little tidy, right? So I'm going back to Leadbelcher, and I've got a very narrow little brush, little cheap thing from the stationery aisle, and a wee bit of Leadbelcher. And I'm scrubbing almost all of this off before I approach the miniature. What I'm going to do is start with the shoulder pads here, and I am lightly going to just drag it at the edges and see if I leave anything behind there, and I'm getting a little bit of silver there. So what I want is a fairly ragged silver edge to some areas. So if I'm finding that I'm leaving just enough, I'm going to flick at the edge of these tanks here and quite roughly start poking at them if I find I'm not leaving anything behind. And essentially we're going to dry brush a silver very, very lightly at the edge of any of these green details. Now this will take a bit of practice, and it's something I thoroughly suggest testing first on an old bit of say, cardboard or something that you've prepped up for the purpose. Like I said, a ragged old brush is going to give you an uneven finish to this. So just flicking very carefully. And in some areas, we'll pick an area and just start stabbing it. And if we need to, we can add a little bit more paint later. I want a rough edge here. Now, once you're confident with how much you're leaving behind, you can get a little bit more intense with it and start jabbing it into places that you want to look like they've taken a little bit of dinging around. Now, this does take some practice, and I'd thoroughly suggest spray a bit of black cardboard first, and you can use that as sort of a testing ground before you start applying it to your miniature. But I'm quite happy with that, particularly up on the back here. I haven't done as much as I did on the front because I kind of figure, he's going to see most of his damage coming in from the front. Now what I've got is some Scrag Brown, and I've watered this down until it resembles a shade. What I'm going to do is I've got here one of my thin brushes, and I'm just going to paint this into some recesses and also splodge it quite messily onto some areas of the armor. What we're going to get here is a little bit of rust. So areas that have seen a bit of dinging up, you can paint this on. If you think you've got too much, just swipe it away with your thumb and add a little bit more in a different position, because that'll help really sell that rusty look. Don't forget too, you'll probably want to do some of this on your nice shiny silver stuff. And I would suggest to you that you can't really go overboard when it comes to Fallout characters. So do as much of this as you think is going to look cool. And bear in mind that it will darken down and look a little more subtle when it dries. Now that is a lot of fun to do. And it is something that you'll want to practice, because I think it really helps sell that sort of worn, battered look of the armor. Some areas are going to want to come back and give it a couple of coats. Like once one load of orange is done, let it dry thoroughly and then give it another. And you'll see on sections like his arm here, very subtly, there is still a little bit of that orange there that I've wiped with my thumb. And yeah, I love doing that. It's a lot of fun. I've got now some black, and I've watered this down quite a bit because I want it to flow fairly well. Now, what I'm going to do is just very carefully paint this into the eye socket. The best part about leaving this till last is if I make a mistake, what I can do is just hit it with a little bit of brighter silver around the edge, and that won't be a problem. But I seem to have lucked out here. Now the last thing I'm going to do before I go ahead and varnish him, I've gone back to a little bit of Celestra grey. Now I'm just going to use this with the edge of my brush to lightly catch the edges of some of the areas of the undersuit. So I don't want to do a huge amount of this, just enough to brighten up some of the backs of the wrists and the knuckles. If you wanted a brighter finish here, you could use Orthuan Grey. I would, but I've run out. So Celestra Grey is what we'll go for. Now once I'm finished with this, what I'm going to do is take him outside, hit him with a matte varnish, and pop a base on him. Got to try and think out something suitably irradiated for this fella. And then we'll get a look at what he looks like once he's all finished. And there we have it. At last, our T51 power armor is complete. And what a lot of fun I had doing this guy. He's come out so well. I'm really pleased with this. I will add as well the list of the stuff that I used for the base in the description, because I'm actually pretty happy with how that kind of grimy Commonwealth look came out to it. So that's pretty satisfying. Now, if you are looking at picking up something like this, but you don't have a 3D printer, you can always go the route of checking out Fallout Wasteland Warfare from Modiphius, which I've had my eye on for a while too, and yeah, there might be a little bit of practice on this guy before, dipping my toes into a new game. As always, thank you very much to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of the patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including producers Alan Nuttall, Kyrie Crawford, Trainboy, Fred, and Jimmy. Your support really is invaluable, folks. Any questions or anything, feel free to drop in the old comment box below. My Twitter and Facebook are both linked there too. And my Instagram. Yeah. So, thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.